All right. Well, now let's transition to the message. And we are in the Advent season. But before I just jump into Advent, have you noticed these great banners or posters and banners in our lobby? Aren't they fantastic? Yeah. Yeah, you can give a hand. I think, so it's a friend of mine and the local artist, Donnie Sparrow, who designed these for us to help us travel through the season of Advent. Actually, I think Donnie and his family might be here today. Oh, there they are. So make sure you say hi to them. He's the designer, he's the artist. Yeah, let's give him a hand. It's a great visual for us as we travel into the season of Advent to Christmas. Now, Advent is a Christian tradition that we mark in our church calendars, where we prepare ourselves as we anticipate and wait upon the coming of Jesus. Now, the word Advent literally means coming and arrival. It comes from the Latin word adventus, which is really fun to know. Now you know a Latin word. And in it, we are invited to wait for someone. There's this anticipation in the air in this season, right? But it's also important to note that we're actually invited to be in the waiting. Do you know what I mean? In this season, we are invited to avoid the temptation to skip to Christmas. Because it kind of feels that way, right? We're like, okay, we're in the Christmas season. The kids are counting down the days to Christmas holidays. They don't have to go to school anymore. And you're counting to maybe have some holidays planned. There's going to be gifts, hopefully. And so temptation is to just kind of skip through Advent and get our thinking right into Christmas. And I say this not as a formality. I say it because Christmas is exciting. We can't wait for it, right? There's something in the air. All that advertisement is about, gifts and cool stuff you can get and buy. But Advent is important for us to notice that it is actually inviting us into a season of just holding on, just waiting, not jumping too far ahead, and anticipating. And in this waiting, we learn that it's not something we just get through, but rather a time to learn much about ourselves. What I mean is that in our life, we live in some sort of anticipation of something all the time anyways, right? We live in a place where we're like, oh, when I get that job, then. Or if I buy that house, then I'll be finally happy because I'll have that space. Or when I graduate school, or when I buy that car, or whatever the anticipation is, we all kind of live in some kind of place of goals and hopes, and we're always jumping ahead to those moments. Advent invites us to a space of just waiting. Don't jump ahead. Don't get ahead of yourself. Pause and wait in the moment. And the reason it's important to remember that is that a lot of our life is actually those moments, right? We anticipate stuff all the time, but our life isn't, oh, once I get that house, or once I get that job. Our life is actually that moment of anticipation and waiting. It's actually that in-between moment. We live in the in-betweens of arrivals and destinations. We live in between goals. We're always onto something, that's true, but if we look past the moment we're in, we actually miss out on a huge chunk of our life. We actually miss out on what is happening right now with us, around us, and in us. It's good to anticipate, it's good to have a goal, it's good to have a hope. Today's theme is hope. But we need to wait and be in the moment, because in that moment, something significant is happening. So if we take these moments for granted, the moment of waiting, the moment of journeying, the moment of anticipating our destination, we miss of so much of who we are. So Advent is actually designed to help us slow down, to wait and be patient, and to discover and to hope. Advent is also time in our church calendar that in our part of the northern hemisphere, we see that the weather typically continues to get worse and worse. Although we've been having it pretty good, actually. But it typically gets worse and worse. The days get shorter. It's dark when you wake up. It's dark when you go to bed. It feels a little bit dreary. Creation is covered in ice, snow, salt, and even mud. And all the things that make life possible seem to be really suppressed, overcome, and even defeated. It is in this moment of what seems to be hopelessness, Advent reminds us, don't skip it. Sit in this moment. Don't jump ahead. But wait, even in the darkness, when all seems dreary, pay attention to who you are, where you come from, and what this moment is leading you to. After all, isn't it often that in the moments of suffering, especially when it's dark and cold and you get up, I get up and I go to the gym often, and it's like, during the summer, it's great because you get up and it's sunny and beautiful, and you're like, this is exciting, I'm gonna have a great start to the day. Now I get up and it's dark, and I'm like, why am I doing this? Like, I'm married, I have kids, like, what do I have to prove? Right? It gets in your head. But the moments of darkness, the moments of pain, actually pause you and remind you that it is in those moments where you actually ask good questions about life. How did I get here? What led to this? What could be different in the future? Like, isn't it true that it is actually in our lowest moments, in the moments when we hit our bottom, whatever our bottom looks like, is actually the moments where we begin to really wonder and ask questions. It's actually the moments where we begin to search and really begin to hope for something different. I mean, when things are going great, we don't think about those things. We just enjoy the ride. Things are great. Why would I care? I don't want this to end. But when things get dark, when things get hard, we begin to wonder, and we begin to hope if life could be different. In the Christian story, it tells us that when it just seemed the darkest, the light shines and God comes through. God arrives. So we wait, we pay attention, and we hope. We live in seasons of life, from young age to old age. I remember when I was 13, I couldn't wait to turn 16 because I wanted to drive. I wanted the freedom to be just like, I can get in the car and go anywhere. Gas prices were low. I was like, I can do this. But of course, looking back, I'm so glad I didn't skip those 3 years, that I just didn't teleport when I was 16, because I would have missed out on those 3 years of development. And when I look back and think seriously about what it looked like to be 13, 14, and 15, those were actually really hard years for me. But they were really important and crucial years, creating and helping me develop to be a person that I am today. They were necessary years. Or my boys were in diapers, and I couldn't wait for that stage to be over, not because it was bad, but I just wanted to play sports with them. I wanted to teach them to skate and be able to skate with them and play hockey and do all these kind of things. And I was just constantly dreaming. I can't wait till they get older. I can't wait till they get older. And now that they're young men, I look back. I didn't ask them if I can use this photo, so we'll see if they're gracious with me. But now that I look back on these kind of things, and Facebook does this to you, right? It brings all these memories up from 10, 5, 6 years ago, and you're just like, oh man. And you look back at this, and you're like, how can I stop time? Why did I want to get past this? Wasn't that amazing that I could actually pick them up and hold them and hug them? They still hug me once in a while, so that's good. But each season invites us actually into waiting, not anticipating something else, not waiting to jump ahead, but to actually live in the moment and enjoy everything that it brings, good, bad, the hard, and the hopeful. Each season invites us into waiting. Now, Henry Nouwen puts it this way. He says, a waiting person is a patient person. The word patience means the willingness to stay where we are and live the situation out to the full, in the belief that something hidden there will manifest itself to us. Impatient people are always expecting the real thing to happen somewhere else, and therefore want to go elsewhere. The moment is empty. I want you to catch that. The moment is empty. But patient people dare to stay where they are. Patient living means to live actively in the present and wait there. Waiting, then, is not passive. It involves nurturing the moment as a mother nurtures the child that is growing in her womb. Waiting, then, is not passive. It involves nurturing the moment. I love that idea of waiting and being in the moment is actually an active moment of nurturing. In the waiting, we experience the full reality of life. We're not missing the moment by hoping for something else and just wishing we teleport to that place where we have the new job, the new car, the new whatever. We live in seasons. We divide our year based on natural seasons with changing weather. We divide seasons based on our sports, right? We divide seasons even how we travel, our age, our hopes, our stages of development. We are seasoned people. And certainly maturity is learning to live in a season, even in a very hard season. So it's important to start there. I think it's important for us to have this baseline that Advent actually invites us to pause, to hesitate, to wait, and to experience the weight of everything that's happening, even when it's very dark. And maybe especially when it's very, very dark. But it's also a season that reminds us that we need to hope. And I know this will sound maybe paradoxical here, what I'm saying, like wait, don't jump ahead, but hope. Yes, waiting in the moment does require hope. Now, Hebrew has few words for hope. There's more than two, but the two that are usually used in this context is yahal, which simply means to wait for someone or something, or kavah, which brings a sense of tension, expectation while you wait. It's almost like, to use kavah, it's almost like a string that's so tightly wound and it's just being pulled till it bursts. It's kind of that anticipation, that kind of wait. And life is filled with both of these kind of hopes. You see, without anticipation and hope, we can find actually our moments to be very tedious and meaningless, especially when it's very hard. Now, the one thing about me, as you get to know me, is that I actually love surprises. And I love surprising people. Now, out of the two, surprises and surprising people, I love surprising people the most. Like I love throwing a birthday party or buying a gift that I know somebody will just really, really love and just holding on to it and be like, oh, this is going to be so good. They're going to be so surprised. I love creating a moment and space for something to happen that's just not expected. By the way, when I was writing this, I was thinking like this would be a perfect moment to like have a firework go off or something. Then I thought, about health and other issues. I might be in trouble. But I love those kind of things. I love creating a moment where people are just surprised. Now, what makes this difficult for me is I'm actually not great at keeping the surprise a secret. Like there's like all this stuff in me that happens. I get too excited. I'm like a little kid. I'm all angsty and anxious. I find myself squirrely, trying not to spill the beans. And I'm just like, oh, I don't want to give it away. But this is going to be so amazing. And like my posture changes. My family's like, what's wrong with you? And I'm just like not able to hold that well. In fact, so much so that like, let's say, when one of my family members, when their birthday's coming up and it's just months ahead yet, like let's say it's 3 months ahead, but I think of the perfect surprise or gift, I'm actually kind of frustrated with myself because I'm like, oh, there's no way I'm going to be able to hold this for 3 months. How am I going to do this? And I find myself super mad at myself that I'm going to give it away. And on top of that, I do something that like counselors and therapists say you shouldn't do, and that is I anticipate and I try to predict how they will feel about the surprising gift. Like I'll be like, oh, they're going to be so happy. This is going to look this way. They're going to respond this way. I'm going to get this big hug. And I try to predict all these feelings and emotions that people will have, which you're not really supposed to do. By the way, am I the only one that does this? Is anybody else in this like zone? Okay, some of you laughed, so I hope you're in the zone. I can barely keep this stuff together. And then when the moment arrives, what I find is that sometimes I predict their reaction poorly. And I'm super disappointed. And it's especially humbling when I try to predict like stuff from my family members, because like my kids, I've known them their whole life, and my spouse, I've known Jessica almost more than half my life. So I'm like, I should know how they will react, right? Because like based on past experiences, based on the past and the present, I should be able to know how they're gonna react. And I'll get this gift, and I have like all these million ideas of how I could use it, how they could use it, and I get it and I package it and I'm like so excited and I have all this stuff and they open it and they're like, huh, that's nice, thank you. This is all hypothetical. I'm just making stuff up. But when my prediction is wrong, it's often because I did not pay attention. I did not pay attention to the past. I did not pay attention to what they were saying, what they were wanting. I did not pay attention to the present, and because of that, my future outcome was a failure in some sense. Now, they're pretty gracious with me, and the gifts are usually okay, so we get over it. But there's something about Advent in that. Advent is a reminder of waiting, listening, and paying attention, and hoping. And yet hoping with attention to the past and present, and living in the moment fully, expecting in Advent that God will speak to us. That we will actually experience God in the moment of our waiting. While we actively observe that God will show up. Even, or maybe I should say especially, in the darkest times. So what I want us to do today is to look at this biblical passage of this historical data of waiting with hope. So to do that, I'm going to turn to one of the most exciting chapters in the Bible. It's found in the Gospel of Matthew, the Good News according to Matthew, chapter 1. Now, if you know where I'm going with this, you know this is a chapter about genealogy, which is exciting, right? Genealogies, right? Names and families? No, just me? All right. Pastor Kurt, when he hears this, Curtis, he's probably like, okay, genealogies, I wonder if I can make an Excel sheet out of this. And he has like all these plans for this. And some of us get excited about this stuff. I heard Curtis retort. I'll be honest, when I was younger, for a long time, when I read the Bible, I would get to genealogy, whether it was in the New Testament or especially in all the long genealogies in the Old Testament, I'd be like, okay, I'm skipping this. Get me to the good stuff. Get me to the stories. In the Old Testament, get me to the battles. In the New Testament, get me to the Jesus stuff. Get me to the narratives. I want to know this. I'll just skip this. I don't need to know these names. But since then, since I have grown, I've grown to love, well, love's maybe too strong of a language. I've grown to appreciate genealogies and what they carry in them. So let me tell you why this genealogy is significant for us and for Advent. So the beginning of the New Testament begins with Matthew's account of Jesus' genealogy, starting with Abraham and running through a lot of other biblical names that are kind of funny and goofy. And like if you get like kids to say them out loud on stage, like nobody can ever pronounce them right. So it's kind of fun and kind of weird. But it's this whole family tree that leads to Jesus. Why is it there? And what actually makes it important or even meaningful to our conversation today? Well, this is written to anchor Jesus' story in the history of Jewish people, right? That's our starting point here. That's why it's there. To confirm God's promises in the past that he had made to his people, and to say now, today, these promises are coming true. That is, to intentionally show us that Jesus is a descendant of David, tying him to the prophecies of the coming Messiah from the line of one of Israel's favorite kings. Now, this is important for us to note, that what makes this genealogy interesting and even comforting for us is that it shows the answers to promises God had made in the past. As well as if we look closely, we find how he answered them we find fascinating how he answers them. We find that it's not a polished family tree, right? Like we'd expect, well, Jesus' family tree must be like these really great kings and really clean and steady. But we actually find that the whole family line is full of really, really messy people. If you get into the story of each one of these people, you would see it's who's who of misfits throughout Jewish tradition, with some wild parts involving like horrible relationships, if I can even call them relationships. Like there's like rape and abuse and even murder in these stories. This genealogy is an honest look at the family Jesus is birthing into, the real human story. And it's refreshingly relatable to us. It's not removed from us. It's not perfect and clean. It's quite messy. What this genealogy also shows us, this is the line of people who had been expecting and waiting on the arrival of a promise that was given first to Abraham, that through him he'll be a blessing to many nations, and later to David, that a Messiah, a hope for the nation, a hope for the world would come through them. Promise made, anticipation began. And what we learn when we zoom in on each name is glorious and tragic stories of success and failure, of being present in the moment and hearing God's voice and following him and really succeeding, as well as being full of empty moments, as Henry Nouwen calls them. Jumping to the thing that you're awaiting instead of being in the moment, to achieve one's own ends mean. Achieving one's own goals. Wow, that was really hard to say. Jumping past and try to bring the Messiah about by their own strength and in their own way to fulfill the promise of God through themselves instead of waiting on God. It's a genealogy full of these things, full of like waiting, here's God, I'm listening, I'm tracking, I'm in the moment, but also God isn't acting fast enough, so I'm going to jump ahead. I'm going to do this for him. If I do this, maybe Messiah will come. And of course, in the process, causing more pain and mess in the wake. It is a history record of human success and failure. And as Scott Erickson puts it in his delightful little book, Honest Advent, by the way, we have the book at the bookstore. I'm going to quote it. It's an amazing book. If you haven't read it, check it out. Scott Erickson, Honest Advent. And he puts it this way. Each one of us, in a way, is a genealogy of all kinds of histories that are worthy of both celebration and regret. We are a culmination of holy moments and juicy moments too. You know what you know. And it is this paradox of interior genealogy that we carry into the season of Advent, wondering if Christ could come into our complicated midst as well. This genealogy is a story of waiting, like each season of our lives, anticipating but stubbornly being reminded not to jump ahead before it's time, to live in the moment and to listen well. What connects us to Jesus' genealogy is that ours, like his, is messy. Messy in our family tree and messy within us. So the season of Advent is a reminder to wait, but also to hope. It is a reminder that Jesus enters the family mess and is most willing to sit and wait in the darkness with us. We are reminded of his faithful actions in the darkness of life. We wait and we hope in a God who has no issue entering this world through and into a messy family, and has no issue entering your world, no matter how messy it is. Jesus promises to show up in our story, in our hearts. It is in the season of Advent that we are actually in the moment of paying attention and sitting, are reminded that God has promised this in the past. And therefore, even though our present is full of circumstance and difficulties and uncertainty, that he will come through. Advent pauses us on the presence of God who enters that darkness with us. One of the prophets who spoke much about coming Messiah, that is the prophet Isaiah, whose famous scroll Jesus eventually actually reads in the temple about himself. Isaiah in chapter 9 says this, For to us a child is born, to us a son is given. You see, Isaiah anticipated a hope despite his circumstance, despite that Assyria was going to be invading, despite all the troubles and all the things that he was experiencing, despite what was going on in Israel. He looked forward to God's promises, rooting himself in the knowledge that God has come through before, and because he has, he will again. Isaiah trusted God's character in the time of darkness, but he didn't jump ahead. He didn't try to predict what the coming of Jesus would look like outside of knowing how God had acted in the past and in the present. He knew God would do what he promised in a time that was best. So he anticipated based on what God said and then actively waited. What we learn in Advent is that biblical hope means trusting God and trusting in God's character and choosing hope in our waiting despite our circumstances. Now I'm just going to invite the band back on stage, and as they come up, I want us to consider how to trust our future because of God's faithfulness in the past. To know despite our troubles, God is with us. He's for us. To us, a child is born. We wait and learn that in our troubles, God joins us, he loves us, he forgives us, and he cares for us. So much so that a child becomes a suffering Messiah. Jesus grows up to suffer. It is no wonder that it is in our waiting, in our dark days of November and December, specifically in our moments of suffering, in the moments of uncertainty, it is precisely then where Jesus speaks the loudest. He steps in and offers grace and hope to each person. He understands our suffering. He's not a God who's removed from pain, but a God who's experienced the full weight of it. We can trust God because of his actions in the past. And even in our hardest moments, we can hope and anticipate because he had come through before. And he promises to do so again. So friends, let us not skip the wait and the sitting of the moment of Advent. Let us anticipate, but wait actively. Let us journey in this moment and actively wait for God with hope, for a God who promises for us to bring life, joy, grace, the things he's promised yesterday, today, and continues to promise into tomorrow. We can trust and hope within our active waiting now because of what God has done for us in the past. Waiting with us. And I want us to catch that. Waiting with us, even in the darkest moments of life. So let's wait. Let's hope. And let's trust our future into God's hands. Would you consider this hope and this waiting as the band leads us through a song?